Hello, you are watching Ruslan Beylov's channel, and on air is another daily summary regarding the course of hostilities in the Ukrainian direction. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the document, or rather a whole package of documents regarding so-called security guarantees for Ukraine, has allegedly practically been agreed upon, and according to him, all key issues there have been resolved. However, I would like to note the following. If these papers contain any clauses about the possible deployment of European military contingents to the territory of Ukraine, then there is only one thing that can be done with such documents: use them for purely utilitarian purposes. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, by the way, made some rather harsh statements the day before, including towards the United States. He recalled that during negotiations in Anchorage, Alaska, certain agreements were reached, but then the American side simply refused to fulfill them. Moreover, today the US is not ready even for those proposals that they themselves put forward back then. However, a logical question arises. Is there anything surprising about this? In my opinion, it has long become obvious that any agreements with the American side do not guarantee their subsequent implementation. That is how it was before, that is how it is happening now, and most likely that is how it will continue to happen. Now let's move directly to analyzing the situation on the front line. Friends, I understand perfectly well that you are primarily interested in the situation in the zone of responsibility of the Vostok East Group of Forces, where the Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, attempted to organize a so-called counter-offensive version 2.0. 2 days have passed since the start of the active phase of this offensive, and it can be said with full confidence: this is the most large-scale offensive operation by the AFU in the last year and a half, since the time of their invasion of the territory of the Kursk region. Yes, the scale was even more serious then, but the current offensive takes second place in intensity after that operation. At the same time, I still cannot disclose some information. Firstly, so as not to compromise sources, and secondly, so as not to hinder the work of the guys on the front line, because right now things are truly extremely difficult for them. Nevertheless, I can still share certain data. So what is known at the moment? First of all, AFU units continue attempts to break through in the Ternovate area. Despite claims by the Ukrainian side that the urban-type settlement has allegedly been fully returned to their control, the real situation looks different. As I said yesterday, this sector represents a grey zone where neither side has managed to gain a foothold. Neither Russian troops nor AFU units have sustainable control over the settlement. Over the past 24 hours, Ukrainian equipment entered the settlement 3 times on armored combat vehicles, but each time Russian drone operators destroyed this equipment. As a result, relative stability is maintained in this sector, and the AFU is failing to develop a further offensive here. Further south, the situation is developing differently. Here, the Ukrainian side has managed to achieve a certain result. This area is not yet colored on the map, but objective control footage from the village of Starokrynka has leaked online, showing AFU soldiers taking 2 Russian servicemen prisoner. From this, we can conclude that there is no longer sustainable Russian control in the settlement. In the videos, Ukrainian soldiers move calmly, without hiding, which also indicates the absence of Russian units within the village itself. I strive to maintain maximum objectivity in this matter. If confirmed video materials appear from the Russian army, I show them. If the Ukrainian side publishes similar materials, they are also taken into account. The day before, video footage also appeared showing Russian drone operators destroying an AFU tank, specifically an Abrams tank. This happened south of the urban-type settlement of Zaporizhzhia. This episode clearly demonstrates the scale of the forces employed by the Ukrainian side. If even such vehicles are being introduced into battle, it means the stake on this offensive is indeed serious. However, 1 Abrams has already been put out of action. To summarize the interim results for the western sector, the situation generally remains non-critical. The main hostilities are being conducted near the line of combat contact. Starokrynka itself is essentially located directly on the line of combat contact, LCC, and its temporary loss is not something extraordinary. An advance into the depth of the defense by the AFU in this direction is not yet observed. A much more difficult situation is developing further north. This sector is less saturated with Russian infantry, and given the active use of armored vehicles by the AFU, it is significantly easier for them to achieve local successes here than in the area of Ternovate or Starokrainka. I repeat, I cannot voice everything known to me, but I can report that according to data from several sources at once, the settlement of Oristopol is currently not under the control of Russian troops. Moreover, questions arise regarding the situation in Sosnovka as well. For now, we are talking about a grey zone. Ukrainian units were recorded there, but without digging in, they entered and withdrew. There is no sustainable Russian presence there either. I note that this information is not yet backed by objective control footage. Therefore, as we always do, we are waiting for confirming video materials to be fully confident in the reliability of the data. The footage will undoubtedly appear, but a bit later. That is why cartographers are not making changes for now, without visual confirmations. Summarizing the general result of the Ukrainian offensive, the following can be said. The AFU has certain successes. They are not global in nature. At the moment, these are local advances, but with a potential tactical foundation. Everything will depend on how quickly it is possible to stabilize the situation. We continue to closely monitor the development of events. Now let's move on to the successes of the Russian army, which were also recorded over the past 24 hours. First of all, a serious advance is noted in the Kramatorsk direction. Here, units of the Yug South Group continue to squeeze an extremely difficult fortified area, for which battles have been waged for almost 3 years. We are talking about the Orakovo-Vasilievka, Minkovka, Golubovka sector. Judging by the map, Orakovo-Vasilievka is finally fully cleared, and the settlement has passed under the full control of Russian troops. In addition, they managed to close the pocket between the village and the highway. Successes have also been recorded in Minkovka. The greater part of the well-fortified settlement is under the control of the Russian army, while AFU units are holding out only on the northern outskirts. It remains to dislodge them from there and establish control over Golubovka. After that, this entire fortified area will completely pass under Russian control, which will significantly simplify further advancement. It is worth noting that about 15 kilometers remain from the current positions to the city of Kramatorsk. Of course, no one is talking about a direct dash, but the fact itself is indicative. Prospectively, we are talking about reaching the Seversky Donets Canal, moving further along the highway, and emerging in the area of Fedorovka too. Moving on to the Krasny Lyman direction, changes have also been recorded here, and there are video materials confirming the advance of Russian units. A few days ago, perhaps even a week ago, the first video material was received from one point. Then confirmations appeared from another point, where the forward positions of Russian troops advanced by about 2 kilometers. Early this morning, new video footage arrived from yet another point. Here, Russian armed forces units advanced towards Lyman by approximately 2 kilometers from the east and took control of new positions in the private sector on the outskirts of the Severny microdistrict. The forward positions of Russian troops in the residential development are under fire from the AFU. Many ask what the phrasing "under fire" means. This refers primarily to the work of Ukrainian FPV drones, as well as artillery. At the same time, it should be understood that if video materials appear recording strikes on Russian positions, then in most cases they were filmed specifically by Ukrainian FPV drones, regardless of whether the strike is delivered by a drone or artillery. Thus, the entire territory marked in red on the map has currently passed under the full control of Russian troops. Information is also coming in about significant successes on the eastern outskirts of Lyman. According to preliminary data, practically the entire eastern part of the city is already under Russian control. At the same time, it is important to understand that Ukrainian positions are not located directly on the line of combat contact. There is a buffer and grey zone between the sides. A similar buffer zone exists on the side of the Russian army as well. Nevertheless, Russian assault groups have already entered Lyman not only from the southern outskirts, as happened previously, but also from the eastern ones. Intensive combat operations continue in the area of the settlement of Stavki. The AFU tried to conduct a counterattack, but it brought no success. The advance of Russian troops here has not yet been recorded either, despite reports from some sources about the expansion of the control zone. This data may not fully correspond to reality, as there are no confirming video materials. The situation is complicated by the large number of Ukrainian FPV crews actively targeting Russian positions and holding back the advance. However, a significant number of FPV drones are also employed by the Russian army here. In general, battles in this sector are largely conducted using drones, which either support the advance of assault groups or, conversely, slow it down. No changes on the map have been recorded here so far, but shifts in favor of the Russian army are expected in the near future as pressure on Lyman continues to mount. This means that Ukrainian units will prospectively have to retreat behind the river. With the arrival of spring, serious changes can be expected in this direction. Active hostilities also continue in the areas of the settlements of Derilovo and Drobyshevo. Moving on with the situation, over the past 24 hours, no news has been received from either the Konstantinovskoye or Dobropolye directions. However, updates have appeared regarding the Zaporizhzhia region, in the zone of responsibility of the Dnieper group, specifically on the Orakov sector. Here, in essence, a mutual exchange is taking place. Certain successes have been recorded for both the Russian army and units of the armed forces of Ukraine. The situation is as follows. In the Novodanilovka area, Ukrainian forces managed to push back Russian units and actually dislodge them from the settlement. However, at the same time, the AFU missed a blow in the area of Novoandreevka, where the Russian army, in turn, was able to enter the settlement and gain a foothold. In addition, a sagging of the defense is also observed in the so-called pocket between these two settlements. Overall, the sector remains extremely difficult. It was so and remains so. As I have repeatedly noted in previous broadcasts, one should not expect any breakthroughs or serious advances by the Russian army here until the Vostok group reaches Omelnik. It is impossible to break through the AFU defense in this sector from the southern direction. If it were realistic, it would have been done long ago. The front line here has effectively frozen. The front reached Orakov back in 2022, and since then, the situation looks the same. Small advances forward, then rollbacks, and so on in a circle, until a serious threat to Orakov appears from the eastern direction, or perhaps from the western one. The front line here will remain relatively static, with minor fluctuations in one direction or another. There is no talk of any serious success in taking the city from the south. At the same time, another success was recorded in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Units of the Dnieper group advanced along a front section about 5 kilometers wide. The depth of the advance ranged from 700 meters to 1 kilometer and 700 meters. Moving on to the Kupyansk direction. Both operational reports and confirmed information are coming from here. We are talking about the settlement of Boguslavka. Video material was previously received from one of the points where Russian units advanced by about 1 kilometer and took control of the entire territory marked in red on the map. Today, reports are coming in that Russian troops have begun clearing the settlement of Boguslavka and continue to expand the zone of control inside the settlement. However, this information is not yet backed by objective video materials. At the same time, confirmed video recordings were received from the settlements of Podoly, Petropavlovka, and Kurilovka. From Kurilovka, video material came from a specific point, and the recording was made by a Ukrainian drone. The footage captures a forward position of the Russian armed forces in Kurilovka, coming under a strike by an AFU drone. Russian units increased the zone of control in the residential development by approximately 1.5 kilometers along the line of combat contact, occupying new positions in the southern part of the settlement. The entire territory marked in red on the map has passed under the control of Russian troops. It is also worth recalling a point I mentioned yesterday but did not have time to reflect the changes in the video. The day before, video materials were received from another point, regarding an attack by a motorized rifle unit of the Russian armed forces in Petropavlovka. The footage shows an AFU FPV drone striking an assault vehicle from which troops had already disembarked. The vehicle was abandoned by Russian units and subsequently destroyed, but the personnel managed to disembark, take positions, and gain a foothold on this section of the line of combat contact. It is reported that as a result of these actions, the zone of control of Russian troops was expanded by approximately 500 meters. In addition, video material was received from the settlement of Podoli, also from a specific point. Here, an attack by a motorized rifle unit of the Russian armed forces, shelling of assault groups by the AFU, troop landing and consolidation in the residential development were recorded. The advance of Russian units in this sector amounted to about 250 meters. Based on this, it can be concluded that the forward positions of Russian troops are currently located here. As for the advance of Russian forces in the area of Kupyansk-Uzlovoy and in the southern part of Kupyansk, there is no precise information at the moment. Video materials have already been received previously, and in each broadcast I mark points where forward positions of Russian units were recorded. Now new video recordings are appearing from neighboring sections of the line of combat contact. This allows us to assert with confidence that a significant part of this territory is under the full control of the Russian army. At the same time, one of the sectors remains in question. Assault groups may have entered there, but were forced to withdraw or were destroyed. Therefore, the so-called fog of war persists in this direction. Extremely little information is coming from Kupyansk. Nevertheless, political news is emerging. It is reported that Volodymyr Zelensky removed the commander responsible for the Kupyansk direction from office. The reason was not so much the number of casualties as the lack of results. The Ukrainian command failed to establish full control over Kupyansk. At the same time, AFU losses during attempts to return the city were quite significant, but judging by the current situation, they failed to recapture Kupyansk. Serious changes are expected in this direction by the end of winter and within the current month. Previously, it was reported to the President of the Russian Federation that Kupyansk would be taken before the end of the winter period. There is little time left, about 20 days until the end of winter, and in the near future it will become clear how serious the advance of Russian troops will be. The same news is coming from Vovchansk as yesterday, and throughout the entire last week. Active hostilities continue in the areas of the settlements of Volchansky Khutora, Vilcha, Simonovka and Gravskoye. Movement of Russian units in the direction of the settlements of Veseloye and Neskuchnoye is also recorded. At the same time, FPV drones are actively operating in the area of Liptsy and Slobozhanskoye, striking positions of Russian troops. In general, unmanned aviation is actively used along the entire line of combat contact, but at the moment, no significant progress in favor of either the Russian army or the AFU has been recorded here. In this regard, we move on to the Sumy direction. News is also coming from the Sumy direction. Many wrote in the comments that the settlement of Pokrovka had allegedly not passed under the control of Russian troops. At the same time, no one claimed that Pokrovka had been taken under full control. Nevertheless, for some reason, part of the audience decided that I was talking about exactly that. The day before, video material was received from one of the points where forward positions of Russian units were located. Russian troops gained a foothold in the northern part of this settlement, but no further advance was recorded. Perhaps some pro-Russian sources prematurely designated Pokrovka as being under Russian control, which caused the confusion. At the moment, this settlement has not passed under the control of Russian troops. At the same time, the settlements of Vysokoye and Grabovskoye did indeed pass under the control of the Russian army earlier. After that, an expansion of the control zone was recorded, but there was no talk of taking new settlements here. Summarizing the results of the past 24 hours, the following can be said. One settlement and about 14 square kilometers of territory passed under the control of Russian troops. We continue to closely monitor the development of the counter-offensive actions of the armed forces of Ukraine.